There
Why
already was
even,
one.
Like, go
It
become
gets
a
to a point,
Presbyterian.
Why even
you know?
bother if this is
Like-
going to be the new platform and for them and what they're wanting to push? Why even bother putting the creeds in for like a pseudo legitimacy?
You don't even
in
believe
your
them.
statement of faith
Because
right?
it's there for pseudo legitimacy.
That's
why they do it.
Yeah.
Right? Like
You can
this
tell
is
it's
the
the way
whole
it is
trick.
'cause of the
People
way it is.
because there's a bunch of people who will say, "Oh no, they have the creeds," and it's like, okay, but the gospel isn't legitimate if you say the gospel and.
So, like, we'll get the main thing out of the way. We're not surprised. She's Episcopalian, okay?
Yeah, right?
If you're
Which I
Episcopalian,
called like 2 episodes ago, and Anderson was like, "Not all Episcopalians," and then this happens. Like, how obviously do I have to be right before we can be like, yes, this
We
is the
dunk on
Episcopalian
Episcopalians all the
stereotype?
time.
and listen,
the-
if you're Episcopalian, we understand that not all of you are crazy, but like, listen, you know, how
Most
much
of you
how
are.
much do we have to endure? You know,
Yes.
before we have a schism, a good old fashioned.
All right, go ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the I'm Telling God About This podcast. In case you've missed it, there's been a little bit of news in the lane of church and the inauguration. A bishop, we use that term loosely.
Bishop Best.
Bishop S, is that the right word? Our buddy.
I don't know. I thought she was
Bishop
just
buddy.
a bish.
Bishopish,
So-
bishopish buddy. Can you say Bishop S buddy 5 times fast? Anyway, we're going to show
She's
you a
a
clip, and then we're going to talk
activist.
about it. So why don't we roll that?
Look at those
Those
eyes.
faces.
One final plea, Mr. President. Millions have put their trust in you. And as you told the nation yesterday, you have felt the providential hand of a loving God. In the name of our
Makes me
God,
sick.
I feel like she needs an insure. I just want to like hand her an
have
insure.
mercy
I'm
on
worried
the
about her.
people in our country who are scared now.
I'm scared.
There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in
No, there are not.
Democratic, Republican,
Yes.
and independent families. Some who fear for their lives.
It's like, what's happening?
I love this. Is the, like, is this for
All right.
serious? The so-called bishop who spoke at the National Prayer Service on Tuesday morning. Oh my God.
Louise. So,
Radical left, hardline Trump hater. She
Yep.
brought her church into the world of politics in a very ungracious way. I love his response. And he says she and her church owe a public apology.
yeah. Oh,
There you
and there's
go.
so many
That
things.
was
I mean,
a
it's like
tweet for those
so,
on audio.
So, like, we'll get the main thing out of the way. We're not surprised. She's Episcopalian. Okay.
Yeah, right?
If you're
Which I
Episcopalian,
called like 2 episodes ago, and Anderson was like, "Not all Episcopalians," and then this happens. Like, how obviously do I have to be right before we can be like, yes, this
We
is the
dunk on
Episcopalian
Episcopalians all the
stereotype?
time.
and
But
listen, if you're Episcopalian, we understand that not all of you are crazy, but like, listen, you know, how
Most
much
of you
how
are.
much do we have to endure? You know,
Yes.
before we have a schism, a good old fashioned.
Like,
oh, wait,
I mean,
we did
there
why
already
that.
was
even
one.
Like, go
it
become
gets
a
to a point,
Presbyterian.
Why even
you know?
bother if this is
Like-
going to be the new platform and for them and what they're wanting to push? Why even bother putting the creeds in for like a pseudo legitimacy?
If you don't even
in
believe
your
them.
statement of faith,
Because
right?
it's there for pseudo legitimacy.
That's-
That's
yeah.
why they do it.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
You can tell
this
it's
is the
the way
whole
it is
trick.
'cause of the
People,
way it is.
because there's a bunch of people who will say, "Oh no, they have the creeds," and it's like, okay, but the gospel isn't legitimate if you say the gospel and.
right.
I like that.
The gospel
I
and
like
social
that.
justice, right?
So,
Yeah.
this is the point. The gospel and social justice. What about just justice? Like, who determines justice? Who sets those things forth, right? Like, we have God's law. We have this, we have obviously perfect, you know, from the word of God and in these things, right? But then we also have this issue, as we talked about in previous episodes. We're not going to go down the whole rabbit hole on, you know, where full authority comes from and all of this. But we know that
We could though.
we could do a whole another episode on it. But if an elected official like Donald Trump, so say you're this, like, I'm thinking about this as a pastor. I see this, I think, what would possess me to do what she did? And on the one hand, you know, good on her for having the stones to say,
Well, I wouldn't doubt her having
challenge
stones.
flag. do you think that what she did took actual courage, given the social environment that she lives in?
oh, in
Well,
her
she's
social
gonna.
circles,
She did
yeah.
a whole media circuit
Yeah,
after this.
for sure.
So
No, I
she
would agree
has,
with that.
like,
I would agree with that. I'll just say this. I would just say as pastor, even if you're speaking to your base and you're going to go back in your circles, it's not something. And she brought this up on an MSNBC thing with Rachel Maddow. It's always scary preaching. There's only like 3 times you ever call people out directly, specifically in a sermon, generally speaking, weddings, funerals. So like anytime you do it beyond that, it's like, ugh. Like, because everybody knows, like everyone thinks when you're preaching, this is the best part. Everyone thinks when you're preaching that you're talking about them. You're not, like most of the time. But you can tell the ones that do because they come up and talk to you afterwards or they run out real fast.
Right.
But when you point it directly like that takes some courage. And to do it at that stage and that level, okay, cool. I think more pastors should be willing to speak truth to power. However, the issue I have is she knew this guy was elected on the platform of dealing with immigration and border security. She knows that this guy was elected on the notion of dealing with the crazy woke trans LGBTQ problems and encountering that and a return to sanity. And in no time in his, campaign or anything else is he talking about doing anything that is immoral or unethical. In
Well, they
regards
wouldn't
to
agree
those
with that.
things,
I mean,
they wouldn't, but they don't have a basis to
Right.
say that because they've thrown out the Bible as authoritative and they've thrown out the Constitution as authoritative. So they don't have an actual basis to make that claim. So my thing is like, that's unethical for a pastor to get up there and like, what are you looking for him to do? To violate the sacred trust that was placed in him by the people who voted for him? Is that what you're asking him to do? Or are you asking him to be merciful in his execution of his duties? Because that didn't come across. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I would say even just the context of the scene, in the setting of the scene, is what bothers me. It's like Trump is making an intentional decision to go to this national prayer service, to this honoring component of his inauguration, and then this bishop flies off into left field and is like, we're going to make this a talking point. And it's like, that's not what we're here for. So
Right.
in one sense, it's like she's like forcing the narrative back into what could have been a beautiful and holy and reverential moment.
She can't, though. She
Well,
can't,
yeah.
because the true idol of the Episcopal Church, based on their actions, based on their affirmation of various sins, their unwillingness to deal with, heresies of injecting, of doing, eisegesis and injecting modern political notions into they are no longer a church in any sense that they are outside the boundaries of Orthodox Christianity, right? Fully. You can't, and for a church, because it's different for individuals versus churches, but the line for that is pretty simple. Once a church refuses to address open, rampant sin inside their church, that's the line.
Yeah, that's
I
agree.
there
And
are
it's-
other doctrinal lines,
Right.
but in terms of behavior, that's the line.
Because what's the
you know?
point of a church, right? What do we say? It's Ephesians 4, right? Equip the saints for the work of the kingdom. Well, you can't equip people to go and make disciples if you are violating the orthodox tenets of Christianity right off the bat.
Right, and like Tim,
Right.
what you said, it can't be the gospel and there's
Right.
there's been many groups that have done this. It's the gospel and whatever the other thing that they emphasize, and for the Episcopalian Church, is really focused on the inclusivity, or the inclusion of every person, and so it's like they're using the same words, but they're using a different dictionary, right? So God loves everyone. Means to
saying
them
this.
how they define it that God is accepting of every lifestyle and sinful behavior.
Yes.
Right.
However.
So yeah, exactly. So it's
Well,
I would agree with that.
Sorry, could I
100%.
just add some detail to that real quick? Because this goes back to the 70s, because the Episcopal Church has always been on the frontier of progressive Christianity. Right. In fact, I can't think of a large denomination that is
I think
more.
the PCUSA came after, like in its progressiveness.
The Presbyterians,
but the Presbyterians
later.
have been around because they're essentially it's Anglican, right? The Anglicans in America. And so they kind of went on the more progressive.
And so it goes back to the 70s when they were saying, gays and lesbians are children of God, which is just not true. So, the children of God is not something that includes humanity generally in the sense of the church, right?
Right.
You become by adoption sons of God through the redemptive work of Christ, and
not everybody is a child of God in the sense that, like, we're looking at, we're waiting for adoption. If you look at Romans 8, right, where all creation groans and we ourselves are groaning.
We were
to be the redemption.
predestined to be that,
right?
Because
Their
we were fallen in sin.
Yeah.
We were adopted,
which is something to address too, because you often hear politicians, when it comes to this issue of immigration, they say something along the lines of, we're all God's children. And
we're all not Americans.
The reality is that's not a true statement. You're only a child of God if you've been adopted. And how do you become adopted? By belief in and submission to Jesus,
and
right?
break the law.
Right, to become a child of God.
Exactly.
So
don't
anyway,
forsake.
Right, but you'll never hear someone say "render unto Caesar" to an illegal immigrant. You'll never hear them say, "Be subject to every earthly institution." To an elite, those kinds of admonitions are only reserved to browbeat Christians who are actually trying to alter the nature of their government through voting. Right.
Right. So this is the point, right? So you have this gets back to previous conversations that we've had on the notion of, like, hey, should we have a theocracy? Should we address things like the same way? Like, should our government should reflect the people who live in it? In other words, if you have a lot of Christians in your community and whatnot, I would expect that your laws and your things represent that. And so, but there's a way to do that, right? We have a social contract. We are under an authority, for better or worse. And so, we have a responsibility to shepherd and to steward that accordingly. And right now, Donald Trump is responsible for that, and our elected representatives and these people. And so asking, and this is the frustrating thing, is that, like, they know this, right? But they simply don't do the value calculation the same way. They would simply say whatever at any cost. But with all due respect to the Bishop Bud,
is that her real name?
She's not a politician. That's literally her name, or Buddy.
Bishop
I
Buddy.
Say.
Oh,
Bishop
wow.
Buddy.
Buddy
I know.
Bishop.
It gets better. So, but
Wasn't Buddy the name of the pastor, the fake pastor in Impastor? Did you ever watch Impastor?
I did.
Yes.
And yes, it was. It was. Impastor is actually
If you
where we got
haven't seen
the
it,
title of our
it was this
podcast
He's
from.
looking through
unknown
the
comedy.
church bulletin, and he's like, "Oh,
It's
homily,
horrible,
part of
by
the
the
service.
way.
Who's gonna do
I
that?"
do not approve watching.
Dude, that's a great
it
show.
was,
That
it
was
was
a great
hilarious.
Show, yeah.
It
had
was
some
hilarious.
There were parts of it. Now we come
Anyway.
to the homily. Who's going to read that?
Yeah, I
exactly,
know.
Josh.
Well, so here's the thing, kind of bringing it, like, not losing and coming outside of, like, that particular instance. I thought more than anything that President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance handled that very, very, they were very classy, right? They weren't, granted, Trump's going to tweet what Trump's going to tweet, but I think he handled that, was like, look, I disagree with it. And I feel like the moment that he makes it a big deal, it becomes a big deal in the news because they want to see that reaction. So I'm thinking, wow, what a difference between the last time that he was president to now, where he's speaking on Truth Social, which is his voice, and he basically went and condemned it and asked for an apology. But when dealing with the press, he was like, it was not a very entertaining sermon. It's kind of boring.
Right, and that was the whole point. That's what I'm saying. I'm like, that was the worst. And if you get a chance to listen to the homily, don't. But
I didn't. Was it real
it's
bad?
It's so bad. And it's like,
I don't know why I'm asking.
Yeah, it was bad.
In what way was it bad? What flavor of awful?
So many
was
ways.
it?
I can't. That's a whole
I
other
can just
episode.
tell you that just from her delivery, it almost like is one of those ASMR
Delivery, I
videos
can
where
tell
you're
by
like
your
falling
haircut.
asleep. It's like It's actually it's calming in the way that the joy of painting with Bob Ross was calming
Not
and
even.
enjoying. So
There's a question for you guys in the comment down below. If you want to see us rip apart sermons in an edifying way and talk about the good and the bad things in them, if you'd like to see bonus material like that, comment down below. Maybe we'll start with her homily. It'd be a good first candidate. I want to talk about.
I have it.
I know we could pull it up. But yeah, like, when Trump decides to handle things in a chill way, you know, like you said, it totally neutralizes the news stream. And you said something right before we started recording when we were talking about this, Tim, about, you know, he's literally like the people who are disagreeing with him, his detractors, can't keep up with what is happening. So all he has to do is just keep signing executive orders and like staying out of the way, and they don't know what thing to get selectively outraged about. They can't build consensus.
Well, and now we know if you want to distract the media for like 3 days where they will pay attention to nothing else, just have Elon make some hand gestures. That's it. That will suck all of the air out of the room.
Someone came up to me and was like, so do you think Elon is... He's like, so what do you think about this? And they showed me the clip, right? They showed me the clip, and I was like, I blame Asperger's for that. Not... And I mean that. Go ahead, you say.
Like, I don't know about you guys in like this flurry of executive actions and this flurry of media coverage, but those things have like surfaced with the like Elon is now this crazy wingnut doing the Hitler salute and this, that, and the other, and it's like I lose a little bit of faith in humanity, and so I try to not even listen to half of these things because I'm like, you guys, it's more obvious than it's ever been before. I hope to the world. It is to me. I don't know.
Well, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, we're just going to see that reality TV show really play out. By the end of Trump's term, Elon and AOC will be dating. She absolutely has crazy eyes.
Don't say that.
Oh my gosh.
Don't say that. We don't want that for you. Elon. We don't want that for you. We don't hope that, but we're not putting that on you. Stay away from her.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, yeah. I'm not going to say it's not on brand, but you know,
she gives him so much attention.
Listen, hang out with Trump a little more. He's made major progress. I have faith in you. You know, call your boys back at the Babylon Bee. Come hang out with us. You know, whatever it takes. Oh, in case you guys missed it, by the way, you know, apparently the people we talk about on this podcast do apparently watch, because we got a shout out in the comment section from none other than Wes Huff. That's right. Wes, thank you.
It's very
Thank you
cool.
for spending the time commenting down below. So maybe, you never know. Maybe Uncle Elon will drop in the comment section.
Hey, you never know what the Donald is doing on his phone. You know? He could,
the Donnie.
he could see.
Oh
what,
man, if we could get a true social shout out from the Donald, that'd be pretty cool.
Speaking of the Donald, Tim, you were saying something before we started recording that I thought was interesting, worth double clicking on, where it's you were not convinced we were going to have this Trump, right?
Oh, yeah, just because, and he's talked about this in interviews.
Yeah.
How his effectiveness was kind of muted in his first term in retrospect, and he attributes a lot of that to like some of the people he chose. You know, he's obviously talked about you know, his attorney generals and some other things that and this is like a whole different Trump. Like, he is going very, very hard on his agenda, and it's extreme. And not only him, he's clearly assembled an extremely aggressive team to execute on those things. And one of the things I was kind of impressed about was there was some federal website related to helping like facilitate abortion, like finding, you know, providers or whatever it was. And that was just taken down offline within like hours of his inauguration. And the reason it's significant isn't because it's a big deal. I don't think that like it was helping. I don't think it was, I don't think a lot of people were going to it and it was like some big on-ramp for, you know, getting abortions. But that attention to detail shows you that if they got things like that squared away going in, they clearly have a very detailed and comprehensive plan around a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're seeing.
They
Yeah,
spent
and
the
I would
last
say
4
even his
go ahead.
response to the bishop is another good example. In his first term, if this had happened, he would be out shouting about it, tweeting about it, talking about it, exploding about it, and he was just like, I don't care, she's crazy, let's move on. And he's just like cruising.
Yeah.
That's the way to handle it. That's the way to handle
Yep.
it, because here's the thing: Trump was his own enemy in his first term, is he would make mountains out of molehills to point out how unjust it is. Now he just does stuff unapologetically, doesn't care about how it looks or sounds, and the media kind of just, it's par for the course. It's par for the course for Trump. I mean, we wouldn't expect anything else. I mean, you look at the Spanish, the Casablanca, the Spanish-speaking White House.gov, and it literally looks like this now. It doesn't exist anymore.
Wow.
And they don't even care about how it looked. Go home. Before it said go home, but they changed it to go to home. But before
Did it really?
just said go home.
Wow.
Oh, that's
listen,
hilarious.
Here's the
I
thing.
digress.
I watched him with Hannity. He did an interview, or was it Hannity? Yeah, I think it was Hannity. And he was doing this interview, and he said, "Hey, I talked to you after you lost the first election, or after the first election." You said, maybe it was better this way. He said, maybe when we come back, it'll be better if we leave and come back than if we had stayed through. I 100% think that that's the case. And I think part of that is 4 years of building the team. Like, everybody's just like, you just said it, like, oh, I think he's got the right team. Like, that didn't happen on accident. 4 years. Like, they didn't stop. Like, they left there and they kept building the team, looking at how things would matter. And I think that's really what matters, because what it shows you is that they picked people who have the right values, who are people of conscience. And that's always what resonated with the base. The base always resonated with the fact that politicians are disingenuous. That was the big issue that people had with, even looking at, I'm not going to name names, but many politicians, right, including in, recent history, where their policies change based on when they're running. But Trump is Trump. We expect him to do these things. He does these things. And then now he's got people who that resonates with. And the fruit of that is the consensus that he's getting. And we'll see if he can keep it. But the consensus that he's getting in the Senate and the House, if he can keep them on task and keep them solidified around this, and this is what's important. And this is what really comes down to why it matters for this podcast. Because the only thing that is going to hold this together is the core value. That's the only thing that everybody has in common, is the thing that makes America great, is that it was founded on principles that are not of this earth, right? One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That's what's going to keep it core. And the moment they start deviating from that, they're going to lose large chunks of their base, because the what do they call it? The purity test. We've talked about this, Tim, like how politicians and people in the culture war always want to get into the purity test. Well, I'm more righteous than you. You're not righteous enough, right? You're not. So that is what he's led on now. And if he deviates from that too much, it'll fall apart.
Yeah, I mean, there is a little bit more to it than that, because the whole founding principles are, which is true. It's true, but it's often intentionally contorted to say, oh, well, therefore, as long as the principles are nominally intact, the actual content of the country and its people are kind of irrelevant. You can just slot people in, and as long as they're under this umbrella of these principles, and I think that's an oversimplification that gets used against Christians a lot, because and part of the reason that I think Christians are vulnerable to that kind of logic is because the big C church does kind of function that way, right? Like as it turns out, there's one there's one criteria for entry. It's salvation by faith, and then you're, part of the club.
Part of the ship, part of the crew.
Right. But that doesn't abolish smaller subgroups of human identity in the same way that the existence of the gospel doesn't abolish the boundaries between what constitutes your family, right? Or your extended family, or any of these other things, especially when,
Sure.
Most of what a country is made of is basically extensions of familial and historical relationships, right? Those are not intended to be atomized and destroyed and say, okay, get rid of all of that, agree to this, checkbox of things, and therefore, now you're part of the club and nothing else matters. No, those things of, shared history, identity matter, just in the same way that you privilege intentionally your children over other children. Doesn't mean you hate other children. That doesn't mean, you intentionally harm them to benefit yours, but you prioritize your own. And that's a biblical principle. I mean, it's very clear that you must take care of your own family first and foremost, and you're considered really an awful person if you don't do that. And so I don't mean that that's what you were saying when you talk about America being founded on Christian principles.
Yeah. I was, and I agree with that, and I think you're hitting it kind of to tie this fully into what we're talking about here with the immigration thing and the intersection of the church and all of this. And it comes down to the fact that those core values are manifest in fruit and in faithfulness. And I think that's what we're seeing, is that over the last 4 years, the people that Donald Trump has pulled together, the policies that he has invested the time, that we're seeing the direct fruits of, right? Things like that abortion side, or things like, listen, promises made, promises kept, that's the Old and New Testament. That's not a new idea. It was ripped straight out of the Bible, right? So, those core values are being made manifest in actual changes in policy decisions, not just lip service, right? And that is reflected in the understanding that you're talking about, which is you're not saying anything unless you're willing to say someone else is wrong. That's very important. You judge a man by the quality of his enemies. If a man has no enemies, he's never said anything to offend anybody, which means he's never said anything at all. So, the notion that everybody can come away from this unscathed is not real. There are people living in this country that do not believe in the reasons that this country exists. They're here because it benefits them. And that doesn't mean they're evil people. It just means they're not vested in the same principles as everybody else. Because if they were, they would have gone through the same steps to do that. Right?
Yeah, and that's a very good point, because clearly we've created a certain set of incentives, and people have acted in rational self-interest for the sake of themselves, for their families,
family,
whatever.
Yeah.
In response to those incentives. That doesn't necessarily make them evil.
No.
Right? As such, you can
But it does make
imagine
them wrong.
doing right, but it does make them wrong. Yes, with respect to the laws of this country,
which they are subject to,
Right.
being on our soil.
But not yet. Right.
Well, even I was, going back to the conversation of immigration, it's not unheard of for immigration to either stop completely or slow down. I think during the early 1900s through about 1960, 70, there was a kind of a immigration freeze, and I think that the reasons for that was assimilation. I think you have, and this happened to the Roman Empire when it got to the end of its day before it got conquered by the Visigoths. You had an insane amount of immigration, and what happened? None of those people that immigrated to Rome and to the Roman Empire actually were loyal to the Roman Empire, and so they were drafted into the Roman army, and they ended up abandoning and leaving because they didn't believe in those values. And going off of what Josh is saying, is a lot of people are here because it's beneficial. I get that. We go and we, depending on, we might work a job that we don't necessarily love because it's beneficial. It's what's necessary. Now, at the same time, it is silly to say that it is necessary for somebody to come to this country illegally for political persecution when they've passed through 5 other countries that have that same kind of protection that is given for political prisoners or people that are persecuted. So it gets to the point where on the conservative or just the conservative side, I would say, or the conservative view of immigration, I don't believe you. You know, it's very difficult to take that into account. But at the same time, there's so much that is attached to a person that says, I think we should slow immigration down. Because ultimately it's, racist, bigot, homophobe. All of these things are attached to that, where it's like, wait, you're adding things that I have not actually said. It is not far off of an idea to say there needs to be some assimilation, that we're all going to be able to gather and gather around the same types of beliefs and core values that were outlined in our Constitution. That's nothing wrong with that, but there's so much that is added to that.
So one thing that I found fascinating with the immigration conversation in this election cycle, really, I guess in the last 10 years, it's been more of a topic, obviously, since Trump's first term and the building of the wall and this, that, and the other. It seems like the emperor, people are now seeing that the emperor is naked. And what I mean by that is, no one is saying we shouldn't have immigration, specifically in the conservative side of things. We're just saying we would like to have legal immigration. We're just saying
I don't agree.
Well, hold on. Let me finish and then push back.
But
we would actually, to that end, we have these systems in place. We want individuals that are expertises in their field, that are actually fleeing persecution. And I don't know why it's been so contentious to say, here is the way, utilize the way. And they're diverse. They're not, it's not narrow. It's like, it shouldn't be crazy to say, you can't just let randos into your country.
Yeah, and
no one else does that.
Yeah, and let's not forget there's another way. We can liberate your country for you.
Right?
Okay? Like, we can make
Greenlanders,
your
come on
country
over.
great again. Also, like Tim brought up a great verse, right? You want to read that one out?
I just bring it up because it's probably the main one. It's repeated several times in the Old Testament. It's the main one that's used usually by bad faith non-Christians who are trying to browbeat Christians into adopting their political points of view. Anytime that's happening, like if someone's going to quote scripture to you as a Christian, it's like, oh, do you believe the Bible is the inerrant word of God? If the answer is no, then it's like, then I completely disregard your interpretation of it, and you're not allowed to invoke
the
it.
Holy Spirit, and therefore the proper means of interpretation.
How are you going to use? It's not like, well, your book even says. It's like, well, you do believe it? No. Then what ground?
What are we talking about?
I believe what you're saying.
Well, here's the verse.
So
read the verse.
Read the verse. Read the verse.
Yeah. So it's just. It's from the Old Testament. It just says, you must not mistreat or oppress foreigners in any way. Remember, you yourselves were once foreigners in the land of Egypt. And therefore, we have to have infinity immigrants coming into the United States with no controls whatsoever.
Yeah, mistreating foreigners.
You got to read into that.
Yeah,
can we? This is interesting. It says, you must not mistreat or oppress foreigners in any way. Here's the interesting thing. When we talk to people that want immigration, like illegal immigration, they say, and we're like, no, we don't want that, and they say something along the lines of, well, who's going to pick our fruit? Who's going to pick our produce? And the response would be like, well, why don't we just have Americans do it? And their response would be, well, Americans would want to unionize. Americans would make it so expensive. And wait a minute, hold on. If I'm not supposed to mistreat or oppress foreigners in any way, you're okay with me doing slave labor because it's cheaper.
So you're saying you want a slave cast? That's what
it seems like.
That's the point. The argument doesn't work in reverse because they don't believe the Bible. The only purpose of it is to try to get you to adopt a specific interpretation of your beliefs.
But listen,
that sword specifically doesn't cut both ways for them.
Right, but this gets back to the bigger point too. Here's what I would say: is that those people are under their own authority. They're under the authority of another ruler, right? And they can leave and they can go to those places. But I mean, I would say this: like, I think that's where faith in God and God's providence and where He's going to lead them is to. Like, I'm a firm believer that God does not call us to sin, right? So you come to the door and knock, keyword, knock, and then, yeah, if you're knocking on the door of a Christian household, then should you find comfort and shelter and the truth and those types of things? Then yes, I would hope that that would be the case, right? But if you come to the door and break it or slip in through the window, that's different. You know what I'm saying?
I remember a story in the Bible where Jesus confronted somebody and asked them, hey, how did you get in here? You don't belong.
Right.
Okay, so here's the counter argument that I want you guys to respond to, because those are all good points. So I'm gonna be the opposition here, and it's gonna taste bitter in my mouth, but I'll do it anyway.
How do you do that, Tim?
No, not because these are what I think, just because I want you. Because then the argument, the rebuttal to that is, oh, well, you should just let these people in.
Wait,
right?
What do
Your
you
whole
mean?
contention is that they're breaking in. Well, don't make them break in. They want to come here. Don't mistreat them. Don't oppress them. Just let them come to the land of opportunity.
I have a responsibility to my family.
Yeah,
And
Go, Josh.
You have to square that with, and you guys will have to help me where you could bring in some scriptural components here, but the law of commons is where that comes in. Like, that math doesn't work. So, like, I would love to hear the spiritual argument, but the math is like, if we are the land of opportunity and this is where everyone wants to come, that argument breaks very quickly with some simple math, because if all of a sudden everyone from every country wants to come here, then it just dies.
And this is really what it comes down to, is why the common values matter. If you value the things that we value, then you will do the things necessary to have them. My family has served our country in going back to the Revolutionary War. Okay, like my
family meaning your
like
last
my
name.
Extended family, like my family, my dad, my dad's dad, my dad's dad, so on and so forth, right? And my point with saying that is that means that my children have gone without their dad for years. I went without my dad, just pointing this out, when he left to go defend the Panama Canal for a year of my life. Like,
which were taken back.
Which I was a little upset about, you can imagine, when I'm like, so then why was my dad gone for a year of my life? So this is what I would say. You know, when these people say things like, oh, well, it's the Panamanians, or, oh, well, it's the, you know, what about these people? What are these people? Then I would say, okay, well, what about, you know, 4-year-old Josh, you know, who didn't get to see his dad for a year? What about my son, Henry, whose dad has to be gone, or my kids, you know, when their dad has to be gone running around playing war games in case, you know, our nation, and not just our nation, speaking of this verse, but foreigners defending other countries. I'm here to assure and deter, right? Assure our allies and deter our enemies. Like, we live in a foreign country. Like, my family suffers. What about my family back home? What about my friends sitting right here who don't get to hang out with me? Why we have to do this remote? Because somebody has to be out there doing that. What about Josh's family who went without him on multiple, you know, deployments when he was out on a boat in the middle of the ocean? The point is that, like, yes, you got to live in a dump.
Some people go into the Navy and get on a boat. Did you know this?
Hey, you know what?
Josh?
I don't want to hear about that. That's fine. That's not real. Not all of us. Not all sailors.
Usually when Tim
sail in
starts out with,
ships.
like, you know, that's crazy, it's usually something.
I was making a poignant point.
Yeah,
anyway,
look,
but my point is ultimately is this: if it is not unkind to ask somebody, there's a difference between being between passing through, being a traveler, a weary traveler on a road, asking
sojourner.
for a roof over your head and a meal and a cup of water. It's an entirely different thing to move into the house. If you're going to move into the house, you're going to work on the farm. That's the point. And work on the farm, I mean suffer for the collective good. So
there's a perfect example of that, Josh. And we take what is it? It's 2 Thessalonians 3:10 and 11, right? Paul is talking to this community. This church in Thessalonica, they're coming together, like the Acts church. Everybody sells what they have and they give to those in need. Everybody's contributing. And in verse 10 it says, "For even when we were with you, we would give you this command: if anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. For we hear that some among you walk in idleness, not busy at work, but busy bodies. Now such persons we command and encourage in the Lord Jesus Christ to do their work quietly and to earn their own living."
And it's not saying
this is a principle, biblical principle, in which Paul is telling the community, like, look, everybody needs to be contributing. Now, the very next verse, he says, "As for you, brothers, do not grow weary in doing good." We can still say, hey, yes, let's not be calloused to the needs of others and say, man, it's really hard. I feel like the Johnsons or whatever, the family down the road is having a hard time, and it seems like they always have a hard time. I want to stop contributing. Are they part of the community? Are they working? Are they not idle? Do they need genuine help? Don't grow weary of doing good. But at the same time, if we see things where people, and this is where it comes back to from the argument for immigration. If you're willing to break the law to come into this country, and knowing that you're going to get a subsidy, you're getting taxpayer money, you're getting put up in a hotel for however long, you're getting food stamps, you're getting all of these things, these benefits, that's coming out of people's pockets. And guess what is required of you?
That's right.
Nothing.
And we can always spread managed democracy to your country.
That's right. And we could bring all, you know what? Rome brought, free trade to all these places.
So listen,
would you say that your heart goes out?
We're not going that far. We need to not become, yes, we're not going to cross that line. However, I will say, we know that people work hard. Man. We know that people work hard, but that's what my point is. It's like, it's selective. It's like, It's like when you have ADD and you're like, I joke with my wife about this, I'll be like, we'll have like 5 or 6 things that need to get done that are pretty critical. And I'll come home and she'll be like, I painted this cabinet. And I'll be like, that's great. What about this thing?
I feel seen right now.
I do the same thing. I'm 100% way more guilty of this. It's like, hey, did you assemble that stuff in the basement? No, but look at my office.
Right.
But that's kind of what's going on.
It's like,
mess,
listen, Josh. There's pots and pans everywhere. Right. But dinner's made.
Yeah. Did you wait? Did you like get a job in the country of your origin and like stand in the line and wait and go through the thing and do the stuff? Like, no, but I've picked a lot of fruit for the last several years. It's like the same thing. Like, I get it, they're working hard, but they're not willing to work the way that what is being required of them. We need we need accountability for every American citizen, and we can't get that if you're not in the system. And
let me push back on just one aspect of that, not because it's completely wrong, but because it is still a little bit incomplete. Those are all essentially they're to some extent arguments of virtue in terms of willingness and industriousness to work, but they are at a larger level economic arguments.
Yes, you're right.
Right?
That is true.
And that is not sufficient, right? There's still it's perfectly reasonable. It doesn't have to go one way or the other, but it's still perfectly reasonable to look at productive, competent, industrious people from another country and say, I just don't really want anybody else here right now. Like, that's okay.
Look at the Swiss.
Like, that's
it's not a right.
Look at the Swiss. That's my big issue. Why is everyone on our case? You know how hard it is to get Swiss citizenship? I've looked into it. It's hard.
Well, what's the other country? Is it Poland? Poland, dude, that's basically, we're like, nope.
Oh, they don't care. Poland does not care.
Right?
But
I mean, so the thing is, we're seeing the effects of just what Tim was saying is a counter argument. We'll just let them in, right? We're seeing that in Europe. We're seeing that in all over the place. Especially since the Syrian war kind of displaced a lot of people, and you had a lot of people that were displaced by war going into cultures that they did not understand and were not assimilating to. And now we're seeing terrible things happening, not just for the natives that were in the country, but also for the people that they're not able to adapt. They're just it's very difficult, right? It's causing some problems. So it's not hard, right, to or it's not a wrong thing to kind of piggyback on what Tim was saying. It's like, it's okay. You don't have to say, everybody has a right to have a citizenship in a particular country if you don't like your own country of origin. There's nothing wrong.
So while you were
border.
talking, I completely agree. I had this analogy. I think it plays. Let me know what you guys think about this analogy, right? Like, we're talking about this at a national scale with borders, but like, if you begin to shrink it back, it seems to be so much less complicated. And what if we shrink the measurements back to your home and your property? Right? I almost wonder if we can find a thread of how people maybe lean left or lean right there alone. Because if we're having a conversation about your house, and am I allowed to come into your backyard and live in your shed? The answer would be no, obviously not. That would be inappropriate. Or steal the bicycle leaning up against the side of your house, or come in and raid your fridge. But if you look at certain decisions that people have made in cities like LA and cities like where it's almost like there's your thread of there's this acknowledgement that in some sense, some people believe people who have need should have the right to take and loot and use and abuse. But it's like, it seems like so much more common sense when we're talking about your home and your four walls and sneaking in through your window and taking up your third bedroom and saying, I live here now. No one in their right mind would say that's okay.
Yeah.
Well,
No.
that's funny
the
that
basic
actually
ethic
happened.
there-
Wasn't there a really quick point? There was I think I saw a video of it was a guy that basically went up to a immigration activist rally and said, "Hey, I have some illegal immigrants here. They need help. Who wants to volunteer to take them into their home?"
Yeah,
and nobody did. Nobody did.
Yeah. They've
Or
done that
What is it?
at
Martha's
every
Vineyard.
rally.
You know,
Yep.
they sent them. They're like, "Well, we don't have
not
the
us.
ability to
Yeah.
host these people.
Well, we
Well,
don't
you
have
got
the means.
50,000 hotel rooms."
Right, but they'll vote for that party. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what you're describing, Nick, is just the basic belief that property is by itself evil and exploitative, and that's not the biblical model at all. Because going back to Genesis, and this is echoed throughout, the concept of ownership and stewardship is tied up with cultivation and effort, and so part of that is recognizing that the country, the space you're in, the city, the state, whatever, is a sometimes singular, but often a collective act of what it is the product of what we have all done, what your parents have done, and so on. And that's part of what confers the virtue of ownership onto it.
Yeah.
And so it does become more abstract when you get out of the individual ownership, but it's the same mechanics at play. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, you see it all the time. People, if you talk to people about, I know people who will try to, scam big box stores or Amazon, but they would never steal from a mom and pop shop, right? It's the same kind of concept. There's a sense of like, once you reach a certain size, it all seems like it's a victimless crime, or that there's plenty, so nobody needs to worry.
Is that not a moral failure?
It
right
is.
There, like that is
100%.
a moral
I completely
failure.
agree with that. And what I would say is, this is my biggest issue, to kind of tie this back to this video and this woman. The false equivalency of the idea that, hey, I was just talking about being merciful and kind to all of these downtrodden people. Like, instead of reading the room and realizing that the person that you're talking to is sitting in the seat on this occasion because a lot of other people have been taken advantage of. Turns out these policies are not victimless crimes. Turns out a lot of people have been hurt by treating, the fridge as if it's unlimited, or treating the house as if, there's some magical, mystical maid service that comes in and turns it over at the night and fixes and repairs everything and goes out. Like, it turns out that somebody was getting a bill for all of that. And that somebody was the majority of the American population, which happened to elect this individual, that this pastor, use that term loosely, is looking at. And that, to me, is gross. Like, and that is what ultimately, shows the dichotomy of kind of where we're at in society. And I know that people on both sides of the fence are guilty of this. Okay? I know that there are a lot of people who have been in need and who have benefited from policies and these types of things, and who maybe even lack the understanding or lack a way to understanding how to do things the right way, and that's a fault of society and culture too. So I'm trying to be gracious with that as well, but it's
don't cheat on your taxes.
Yeah,
right. Like, do your taxes. Don't try to game the system.
Right. So I say all that to say, this is not about.
You're gonna defend taxes in January? That is, do you even want subscribers?
I'm waiting to file my is anybody else waiting to file taxes until like a few more executive orders come out, or is that just
Yeah, right.
Is that a thing?
I'm literally waiting. I am. My wife was about to file
that.
taxes, and I was like, she was about to file taxes, and I was like,
Just
wait a couple weeks.
Yeah.
I want to see where this goes.
I don't even have all of the forms
he?
and paperwork yet.
That's I can't do it till the last minute because my taxes are so complicated. It's like they're coming in the very last minute anyway.
Yeah.
Can Trump do an executive order to like make it like a flat tax?
He could do a lot of things. I mean, I don't know if he could go that far, but he could do a lot of things that could affect it. So anyway, if you enjoyed this conversation, we want to hear what you think. Like, listen, we know that, we're being tongue in cheek. Please take this in good faith. No, we understand that there are good, solid Christians in the Episcopal Church. We understand that there are well-meaning
I don't concede that point.
All right. Some of us conceive that,
and
right?
have met
Right.
those
I'm not
in the
saying
military
that
or
women
other
in ministry
places,
is evil across the board. What I'm getting at is, take this for what it is. We want to hear what you think. We want to know what your thoughts are on this event. What your thoughts on immigration. Have you wrestled with this? But put it in the comments. We want to hear from you guys. Until next time, like and subscribe. We'll see you next week. Oh, also check out our most recent interview that just dropped last week. By the time you're seeing this, it's definitely worth watching. If you want to see more interviews, please hook us up with people or
make
drop
a suggestion in the comments.
In the comment,
Yeah.
we want to hear about them. All right, till next time.
Civilization, what do you have? 20 years of dumpster fires, purple hair, people who don't know which bathroom to go into. Get off my lawn.